Welcome to the debate. If you break your arm, you go to the hospital, you get an x-ray, right?
Right. Clean break, very obvious.
Exactly. It gives you a clean, jagged white line, broken or not broken. It's binary, it's visible, and frankly, it's comforting. We know exactly how to fix it. But when you step into a modern professional environment to diagnose why a highly talented team is suddenly just failing,
Oh, that X-ray machine is completely useless.
completely useless. So today we are diagnosing the invisible disease of the workplace. We're talking about covert competition and social undermining.
Yeah, we are talking about that coworker who, smiles at you in the break room, asks about your kids, and then deliberately forgets to CC you on a critical email,
Oh, the classic.
right? Or the manager who gives you a backhanded compliment that just leaves you questioning your sanity for 3 days. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. It's knowledge hiding, the silent treatment, indirect relational aggression.
And it is devastating to organizational health. So the central question we are tackling today, drawing from a wealth of contemporary psychological and organizational research, is where this toxicity actually comes from.
What's the root cause?
Yes. When we see this covert sabotage, are we looking at a rational, strategic response to a toxic organizational structure? Things like a bottom line mentality or systemic injustice? Or are we looking at something fundamentally internal?
An innate psychological deficit, yeah, and an evolutionary drive to protect a fragile ego.
Exactly. So from my position, I argue that systemic organizational pathologies essentially breed this covert sabotage.
And I will be arguing that this behavior is strictly rooted in individual psychological frailty and the drive to protect one's self-evaluation. I mean, you look at the workplace and you see a broken system. I look at it and I see a deeply flawed human psychological engine.
Well, I look at the data. And for me, all the evidence points to social undermining being a structural environmental issue. Let's look at the actual architecture of this, starting with what the literature calls a bottom line mentality, or BLM.
Right, the metric obsession.
Yes, this happens when leadership essentially signals that only the final metric matters and everything else, ethics, collaboration, mental health, is just collateral damage.
Sure, but
Employees aren't being malicious when they sabotage each other. They are rationally adapting. Covert sabotage just becomes a sheer survival mechanism.
But you are treating the environment as the prime mover, when it is the human mind that actually builds and interprets that environment. You are blaming the cage for the tiger's teeth here.
I don't think that's a fair.
Sabotage is fundamentally an individual evolutionary phenomenon. The research points us toward the self-evaluation maintenance model, or SIM, and if we break that down, it explains a very specific quirk of human biology, the unidirectional drive upward.
Okay, let's clarify that for the listener. What does that actually mean in the context of a cubicle?
It means human beings are biologically hardwired to compare themselves to their closest associates, not to like abstract benchmarks. So if a stranger across the country wins a Pulitzer Prize, you probably feel inspired.
Sure.
But if the person sitting at the desk next to you gets a $5,000 raise, you feel devastated.
Well,
Our self-esteem is deeply tied to our proximity to success. So sabotage isn't dictated by the corporate structure. It comes down to an individual trait, specifically low self-efficacy. When a high-efficacy person sees their peers succeed, they think, I need to work harder.
right, healthy competition.
Exactly. But when a low self-efficacy person sees that same success, they panic. They don't believe they have the capability to rise up and meet that standard. So their only evolutionary recourse is to tear the other person down to bridge the gap.
I completely disagree with framing this as some isolated biological inevitability. If it were purely an individual trait, just one person with a fragile ego, we would see isolated, localized incidents of sabotage.
We do see that.
But what the research actually shows is the spillover effect, contagion. Think about the famous study of civil servants in Tehran.
Ah, yes.
These were public organizations operating with massive resource scarcity, rigid hierarchies, zero transparency. In that environment, researchers found that perceived injustice was the catalyst that essentially set the whole building on fire.
But perceived injustice is subjective.
It is subjective, yes, but when an entire organization operates opaquely, that subjectivity becomes a collective reality. When people feel the game is rigged, episodic envy, like being jealous of one single promotion, it doesn't stay localized.
Because they share the sentiment?
Right, it triggers a systemic deactivation of internal moral regulations across the entire team. Suddenly, the moral barriers drop. It turns into indiscriminate, team-wide sabotage. I always come back to this analogy. If one fish dies, you examine the fish. But if the whole tank dies, you have to look at the water.
That's a clever analogy, but
If social undermining is just about individual frailty, why do entire departments suddenly succumb to this toxicity the exact moment a new, hyper-competitive VP takes over? The water is poisoned.
okay, the water might change temperature, but the fish are still acting on their underlying biological imperatives. And frankly, the water doesn't create the shark.
The shark?
Yes, let's look at the specific typologies of these people. The literature calls them frenemies, and they come in very specific chronic profiles. You have the rival frenemy, the unstable frenemy, the backstabbing frenemy.
Right, I've read that paper.
These individuals carry chronic status anxiety. This isn't some sudden reaction to a new VP's corporate policy. This is relational aggression that peaks in adolescence, usually in same-sex peer groups, and they just pack it up and carry it right into adulthood.
So you are saying a toxic corporate culture is basically just a collection of adults acting like anxious teenagers.
I'm saying the behavior persists regardless of the environment. And if you want proof that this is driven by internal ego protection rather than corporate strategy, look at how they fight. Why is it covert? Why don't they just openly challenge their rival?
Well, because open aggression gets you fired in a corporate setting.
No, it's because of plausible deniability. They need to protect their own psychological self-evaluation. If they attack you directly and lose, their ego is shattered. So they use passive sabotage.
They hide in the gray areas.
Exactly.
They deliberately delay a crucial document. They leave you off a calendar invite. They do this because they desperately need to believe they are the good guy. They want to destroy you without risking the cognitive dissonance of admitting to themselves that they are a bully. That is a deeply internal psychological mechanism. It operates completely independently of the water they swim in.
I just can't accept that the environment plays no role in the weapon choice. The decision to use plausible deniability is absolutely a strategic calculation based on the rules of the tank. Let's dig into the weapons they use. You brought up withholding documents.
Yes, knowledge hiding.
Right. In the research, this is called knowledge hiding, deliberately concealing task-relevant information, or, playing dumb when a colleague asks for help.
Exactly. And knowledge hiding perfectly illustrates my point about internal psychological fear. The research shows this maneuver is driven by what psychologists call a prevention regulatory focus.
Let's break that down for the audience.
A prevention regulatory focus means the brain literally shifts gears. It stops playing to win, and it starts playing strictly not to lose. You become hyperfixated on preventing any loss of your current status.
Defensive posture.
Totally defensive. We see this incredibly often in older or highly insecure employees when they are confronted with a faster rising younger coworker. They experience preemptive envy. Notice that the young coworker hasn't actually done anything to harm them yet.
Right, it's all in their head.
Yes, the insecure employee is reacting to an anticipated future threat. They fear obsolescence. They hide knowledge to artificially inflate their own value and safeguard their standing. It is ego preservation, pure and simple.
But wait, they fear obsolescence because the organization has explicitly or implicitly told them that they are obsolete. They fear it because they work in an environment where one person's rise fundamentally necessitates another person's fall.
Not necessarily.
It is structurally imposed by the bottom line mentality. Let's look at social exchange theory. We know that workplace interactions are governed by reciprocal obligations. If an organization actually provided a genuinely safe, supportive environment, employees would reciprocate with trust and information sharing.
You are assuming human nature will just peacefully align with a good corporate policy.
I'm assuming human nature responds to the incentives it's given. Think about Simon Sinek's concept of the infinite mindset. Cynic argues that business isn't a finite game with winners and losers. It's an infinite game, where the goal is just to stay in the game and improve.
Right, I'm familiar.
If a company truly adopts that mindset, if it evaluates and rewards long-term collaborative progress rather than just ranking employees on a bell curve, the psychological math changes. You don't lose when someone else wins. So wouldn't the impulse to hide knowledge evaporate? The biological threat trigger is deactivated because the threat is gone.
Look, the infinite mindset is a beautiful utopian ideal, but it fundamentally ignores human evolutionary psychology. You cannot legislate away the biological drive for status. Remember the self-evaluation maintenance model?
Yes.
We measure our success against the person in the cubicle next to us. The closer the associate and the more relevant their task is to our own core identity, the higher the psychological threat. If you and I are both graphic designers and you win an award, my brain registers that as a threat to my identity as a good graphic designer.
Even if we're on the same team?
Especially if we're on the same team. You can eliminate the bell curve, you can give everyone a collaborative bonus, but if you outshine someone with low self-efficacy, they will still experience a sharp decline in self-evaluation. The psychological pain of that ego bruise is what triggers the knowledge hiding. The corporate bonus structure is completely irrelevant to the ego.
You're ignoring the scale of influence an environment has on behavior. Yes, humans compare themselves. That's a baseline trait. But how they act on that comparison, whether they choose to learn from you or sabotage you, that is dictated by the environment.
I don't see it that way.
Let's go back to the Trayron civil servant study. When resources are tight and the hierarchy is rigid, people view the system as unjust. When there is perceived injustice, the negative emotions of envy are weaponized. Colleagues view a high performer's success not as a result of hard work, but as the result of favoritism.
Because it's an easy excuse.
Yes, and if they believe the system is cheating them, that drastically lowers their internal moral barrier to cheat the system back. If you dismantle the bottom line mentality and establish transparent, merit-based decision-making, you remove the toxic catalysts. You don't have to cure human nature, you just have to stop incentivizing its darkest traits.
But you are assuming that a transparent system is interpreted rationally by an irrational, envious mind. You can have the most transparent, perfectly merit-based system in the world. An employee with low self-efficacy will still perceive it as unjust because their ego physically cannot accept the alternative.
Which is?
Which is that they are simply being outperformed. They will invent a narrative of favoritism to protect themselves. And, this brings us to the ultimate practical point of contention between our two views. How do we actually neutralize this threat?
Okay, let's go there.
If you believe the system is the problem, your solution is to wait for the CEO to rewrite corporate policy. Good luck with that. Because this drive is individual and psychological, interpersonal psychological tactics are the only reliable defense for a target of social undermining.
I'm highly skeptical of this, but I want to hear the mechanics of it. How exactly does an individual defend against invisible sabotage without reforming the environment that allows it to happen in the first place?
By hacking the saboteur's own psychological mechanisms and using them against them.
Hacking them?
Yes. The research points to a fascinating, completely counterintuitive tool, the Ben Franklin effect. If you have a covert competitor, a frenemy, who is secretly undermining you with micro-insults and knowledge hiding, you, as the target, must intentionally ask them for a small, meaningful favor.
Wait, you are suggesting that if someone is actively trying to destroy my reputation, my best defense is to go ask them for help?
Exactly.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It sounds dangerous until you understand the underlying mechanism, which is cognitive dissonance. It is one of the most powerful forcing functions in human psychology. When the covert competitor actually performs that small favor for the target, say they agree to review a minor project detail or lend a piece of specific expertise, their brain immediately encounters a stark inconsistency.
Right. Two conflicting truths.
Right. The internal belief is, I resent and compete with this person. But the physical action they just performed in reality is, I am actively helping this person. The human brain absolutely hates dissonance. It causes actual psychological distress.
It literally hurts.
Exactly. Now, they cannot undo the action of helping you. That's in the past. So to relieve the distress, the brain alters the internal attitude to match the behavior. The saboteur's brain rewrites the script. It says, I must actually respect this person, otherwise I wouldn't have helped them. It forces them to rationalize their own kindness, which neutralizes the hostility at its absolute psychological root. No corporate policy change on Earth can achieve that level of cognitive rewiring.
I mean, I see the elegance in that. It's psychological jujitsu. But I have to push back hard on the scalability of that solution and, frankly, the reality of what it demands from the victim.
It's an active defense.
But you are placing the entire burden of solving workplace toxicity squarely on the shoulders of the person being attacked. You are asking an employee who is already suffering from social undermining to become some master manipulator of cognitive dissonance just to survive a Tuesday staff meeting.
Well, it's better than a passive hope for systemic change.
But look at the toll it takes. The research on targets of covert competition is grim. Because the sabotage is ambiguous. It's never a scream in the hallway. It's an omitted email, a slightly passive-aggressive comment, a delayed response. The target spends immense mental energy just trying to decode reality.
Yeah, did they mean to do that, or was it a mistake?
Exactly. This leads to what psychologists call chronic interpersonal rumination.
The walking on eggshells?
I completely agree. The cognitive load is devastating. It is beyond devastating. They go home on Friday and spend the entire weekend ruminating over a single weird interaction. This leads to profound psychological distress, work-related fatigue, a massive decline in job performance, serious burnout.
Yeah, the stats are terrible.
When people are that exhausted by chronic rumination, they do not have the bandwidth or the emotional distance to execute sophisticated psychological operations like the Ben Franklin effect. And they shouldn't have to. They just want a fair system. They want a manager who has the competence to recognize that a bottom-line mentality is destroying the team's culture and the courage to stop it.
That is a very fair critique. The psychological toll of the target is immense, precisely because the threat is invisible. You are fighting a ghost. And I think this is where our perspectives actually find a point of deep convergence.
Oh?
Whether you view the root cause as systemic injustice cascading down from the C-suite or individual ego protection bubbling up from a fragile coworker, the outcome for the victim is identical. The breakdown of organizational trust is absolute.
It is, and the toxicity compounds itself. We talked about cognitive dissonance with the Ben Franklin effect, but the dark twin of that is also at play here.
How so?
Just as doing a favor makes you like someone more, doing harm makes you like them less. When a saboteur successfully undermines a colleague, their brain needs to justify that harm to avoid feeling like a bad person. So they convince themselves the victim deserved it. They actively devalue the target in their own mind to resolve their dissonance, which just creates a feedback loop of increasing self-justified hostility. The entire system degrades.
Which perfectly illustrates how wildly complex human competition really is. You cannot truly understand workplace dynamics by looking exclusively at macro-organizational flowcharts and compensation structures. But to your point, you also can't understand it by looking solely at a single individual's personality test in a vacuum.
Exactly.
The architecture of covert competition is built with psychological bricks, status anxiety, low self-efficacy, cognitive dissonance, but it is housed within organizational walls that either constrain those impulses or actively encourage them.
Right, the interplay between a zero-sum structural environment and the fragile human ego is where the true danger lies. If leadership ignores the systemic pressures of the bottom-line mentality, they are essentially building a breeding ground for sabotage. But if they ignore the psychological realities of envy and status anxiety, they leave their employees completely unprotected from the frenemies operating in their midst.
And there is so much more to explore in the source material regarding this. We haven't even touched on the specific cognitive biases that allow people to justify their own bad behavior.
Oh, we could do a whole show on that.
Easily.
Or the long-term career trajectories of people who rely heavily on relational aggression. Absolutely. We've really only scratched the surface of how deep and calculated these covert maneuvers go. We will leave it to our listeners to analyze their own professional environments. Look at the water you are swimming in, and look very closely at the fish you are swimming with, and form your own conclusions.
Just remember, not every smile in the boardroom is friendly.
Indeed. We started this discussion by talking about the comfort of an X-ray machine, the desire for a clean, visible break that tells us exactly what is wrong and exactly how to fix it. But covert competition doesn't show up on a structural scan. Until you learn to read the shadows, the unsaid words, the deliberately hidden knowledge, the strategic delays, you will never truly see the breaks in your organization. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.